Ladies and gentlemen, the moment someone starts pulling away from you, the moment their texts slow down, their tone shifts, and you start to feel that cold distance creeping in, that's not your cue to chase. That's your cue to stop. Because every time you keep texting someone who's losing interest, you're not fighting for love. You're negotiating your worth. And the second you realize that silence speaks louder than mixed signals, that's when everything changes. That's when your power comes back. Not when they reply, but when you decide you don't need them to. And when someone starts to pull away from you, when their messages become shorter, when their responses take longer, and when their enthusiasm seems to fade, you can feel that shift deep in your chest. You start questioning yourself. You replay old conversations, trying to find where things went wrong. You wonder if you said too much, cared too much, or maybe didn't do enough. But the truth is, it's not always about what you did wrong. Sometimes it's about what you keep doing when you feel that shift happening. That's the moment where most people make the biggest mistake. They try harder, they text more, they over-explain, they chase validation from someone who's already withdrawing. And you see, when someone starts acting distant, the natural instinct is to fight for their attention. You think if you just show them more love, they'll come back. If you remind them of how good you are, they'll remember what they're losing. But that instinct comes from fear, not strength. And fear never attracts respect. When someone starts to fade and you respond by trying harder, you're teaching them that your attention is unconditional. Even when they're not showing up for you, you're teaching them that you'll stay available, even when they're giving you the bare minimum. And here's the truth. Attraction doesn't fade. Because you stop texting, it fades because the energy became unbalanced. One person is doing all the emotional heavy lifting, while the other gets comfortable taking it for granted. So when they start becoming inconsistent, when they start leaving you on read, when their interest turns into indifference, that's not your cue to double down. That's your signal to pause. That's your moment to reclaim your value. And because the more you try to prove your worth to someone who's pulling away, the less they see it. They don't look at your extra effort and think, wow, this person really cares. They look at it and think, I can come and go as I please and they'll still be there. It's not because they're cruel. It's because human nature responds to scarcity, not abundance. When something is always available, it loses its power. The same goes for your attention. When you're always ready to respond, always ready to fix, always ready to make it right, you lose the mystery, the tension, the sense of value that makes someone stop and think, I could lose this. And so when they start doing this, when their communication shifts, when their tone changes, when they stop putting in the same effort, that's your cue to stop texting. Not as a game, not as manipulation, but as an act of self-respect. Because silence isn't punishment, it's a mirror. It reflects the energy you've been receiving. It says, I won't match effort with desperation. I'll match it with balance. And when you stop chasing, you create space. And in that space, two things happen. Either they step forward because they realize your absence matters, or they stay distant because your absence didn't. And as painful as that truth may be, both outcomes are a win. Because either you get clarity about who's truly invested in you, or you free yourself from someone who only wanted your attention, not your presence. And the hardest part is fighting that urge to reach out one more time, to send that text that says, are we okay? Or did I do something wrong? You want closure, reassurance, something that settles the anxiety in your chest. But understand this, the people who genuinely value you won't leave you guessing. They'll make sure you feel secure. They'll communicate. If you have to chase consistency, you'll never find peace. You'll just be managing uncertainty disguised as love. And when you stop texting, you're not walking away from the connection. You're walking towards self-worth. You're showing that your energy isn't free, it's earned. You're reminding yourself that silence doesn't mean weakness, it's discipline. It's knowing when to invest and when to stop bleeding effort into someone who stopped appreciating it. And think about this. The most attractive people aren't the ones who chase validation. They're the ones who move with quiet confidence. They know their presence is valuable. They know they bring warmth, humor, and light to people's lives. So when someone starts withdrawing, they don't panic, they observe, they don't beg to be chosen, they choose themselves. And that confidence creates magnetism. It draws respect without ever needing to demand it. And if you have to constantly prove your place in someone's life, you're in the wrong place. Real connection doesn't require convincing. It flows naturally when both people are emotionally invested. So the next time someone starts pulling back, instead of sending another message, pause and ask yourself, what am I trying to get from this person that I'm not giving to myself? Because often it's not them you're chasing. It's the feeling of being wanted, the validation that says you matter. But here's the secret. You don't need their validation to confirm your worth. You define that every time you choose peace over panic, self-respect over desperation, silence over chasing. And to let someone's inconsistency make you forget your own value. The moment you stop texting someone who's no longer reciprocating, you shift the power dynamic back to where it belongs, with you. You remind yourself that you have options. You remind yourself that you are not dependent on crumbs when you deserve the feast. Because every time you stop reaching out to someone who's stopped showing up, you send a message, not to them but to yourself, that says, I will not beg to be valued. And you have to trust that the right people won't need constant convincing. They won't make you question where you stand. They'll match your energy, your effort, and your consistency. They'll make communication feel easy, not exhausting. Until then, protect your energy like it's sacred, because it is. Don't text someone who's showing you with their actions that they've checked out. Don't explain your worth to someone who's stopped listening. Don't keep trying to light a fire in someone who's already gone cold. And the moment you choose not to send that message, that's your breakthrough. That's you reclaiming your peace, your confidence, your self-control. That's the moment you stop chasing potential and start demanding reciprocity. Because love isn't built on how much you can give, it's built on mutual effort. And if they start doing this, if they start becoming inconsistent, indifferent, unavailable, then stop texting them immediately. Not to prove a point, not to make them chase you, but because you deserve more than to be an option in someone else's story. You deserve to be the person someone chooses, fully, clearly, and without hesitation. And then when you make that decision to stop reaching out, to stop trying to reignite something that's already dimming, you begin to feel something powerful rise within you. At first, it's uncomfortable. Your mind screams at you to text, and you tell yourself, yeah, maybe they're just busy, or maybe they didn't mean to be distant. You find excuses because you want to believe the story that this connection still has life. But that discomfort you feel in the silence isn't just about missing them. It's about withdrawal. You've been feeding your self-worth with their responses, their attention, their energy. And now that it's gone, your confidence starts to shake. But that moment, the one where you fight every urge to reach out, that's the moment you grow. That's the muscle you build. You start realizing that peace isn't found in their reply. It's found in your restraint. Every time you resist sending that text, you're teaching yourself self-control. Every time you stay silent instead of chasing clarity, you're teaching yourself patience. You're showing yourself that you can survive uncertainty without seeking validation to soothe it. That's real strength. And because let's be honest, it's easy to walk away when you've stopped caring. It's easy to move on when there's no emotion left. The real test is when you still care deeply, but choose yourself anyway. When your love doesn't blind you to your boundaries. When your heart says reach out, but your mind says remember how it felt last time you did. That's maturity. That's the kind of emotional intelligence that separates people who repeat patterns from people who finally heal. And so when they start being inconsistent, stop asking what you did wrong. Start asking what they stopped doing right. Stop rewriting the story in your head to protect their image. Stop romanticizing potential, because someone who truly values you doesn't leave you guessing. They don't disappear to make you wonder if you matter. They don't make you chase them just to keep their interest alive. They make you feel seen, not confused. They make you feel chosen, not tolerated. And when you step back, when you stop texting, you give yourself the opportunity to see things clearly again. You begin to notice all the places where you were overcompensating, the moments where you downplayed your needs just to keep the peace, the times you ignored your intuition because you didn't want to lose them. But now, without the noise of constant communication, you can see the imbalance for what it was. You were giving too much. and they were taking it for granted. That realization stings, but it's also freeing because now you have the power to stop that pattern. And it's not about pretending you don't care. It's about caring in a way that doesn't cost your dignity. It's about realizing that someone who wants you will show up without needing to be reminded how. You shouldn't have to beg someone to see your worth. You shouldn't have to convince them that you deserve attention. The people meant for you won't need to be chased. They'll choose to stay. And you know what happens when you stop texting someone who's pulled away? You stop leaking energy. You stop pouring emotional effort into a void. That energy, the one you've been using to keep a one-sided connection alive, starts coming back to you. You begin to think more clearly. You start showing up better in your work, in your friendships, in your goals. Because when your heart isn't preoccupied with uncertainty, your life starts to move again. You stop waiting for someone else's effort to dictate your happiness. And something incredible happens when you shift your focus from them to you. They notice, maybe not immediately, but eventually, because people can feel when your energy changes. They can sense when you're no longer orbiting around them. That's when they might start texting again, trying to pull you back in. But by then, you'll be different. You'll have tasted what peace feels like. You'll have learned that attention isn't the same as affection, and consistency isn't something you should have to beg for. And you'll realize that their sudden interest doesn't mean they've changed. It means they missed the control they had when you kept showing up no matter what. But this time you won't fall for it. You'll see that the same behavior that made you anxious before no longer affects you the same way. Because once you recognize your value, you can't unsee it. You can't unknow the strength it took to walk away from inconsistency. And then maybe you'll still think about them. Maybe you'll still have moments where your heart aches for what could have been. That's okay. Missing someone doesn't mean you made the wrong decision. It just means you cared. But caring for someone doesn't mean you should keep abandoning yourself to keep them close. Real love doesn't demand self-neglect. Real love doesn't ask you to lower your standards. And you have to be willing to let people feel your absence. Let them wonder where your energy went. Let them realize that access to you isn't permanent, it's earned. Because the more you hold on to people who don't reciprocate, the more you push away the ones who actually would. The universe doesn't bring you peace when you're holding on to chaos. It waits until you clear space for something real. And that's what stopping the texting does. It creates space, emotional space, mental space, space for healing, space for new connections, space for clarity. Because when you're not glued to your phone waiting for a reply, you start noticing how beautiful your life can be without their inconsistency stealing your joy. You start reconnecting with your own rhythm, your own desires, your own sense of wholeness. And you might be surprised how much power returns to you when you stop chasing. Suddenly the world doesn't feel so small anymore. You stop waking up with anxiety over unread messages. You stop measuring your worth by someone else's attention span. You start to feel lighter. You start to remember what it feels like to be enough, not because someone else said so, but because you decided you are. And then one day you'll look back on this version of yourself, the one who used to overthink, who used to chase, who used to wait, and you'll smile because you'll realize that the moment you stopped texting wasn't just about walking away from someone else. It was about walking back to yourself. That silence that once felt unbearable became your greatest teacher. It taught you patience, strength, and self-respect. It showed you that you can survive emotional uncertainty and still thrive. And so when you feel tempted to reach out again, remind yourself of what happened the last time you did. Remember how you felt small when they ignored your effort. Remember the endless waiting, the disappointment, the overanalyzing. Then remember how peaceful it felt when you finally stopped. That's not weakness, that's progress. That's what growth looks like. Choosing discomfort today to protect your peace tomorrow. And maybe one day they'll realize what they lost. Maybe they'll come back hoping to reconnect. But by then you won't need their validation anymore. You'll see that the version of you who stopped texting wasn't being cold. They were being courageous. You'll realize that the moment you chose yourself was the moment you became unshakable. Because when you stop trying to convince someone to see your worth, you give yourself permission to live in a world where your worth is already seen. And so don't text them. Don't chase closure. Don't try to fix what someone else broke by being careless with your heart. Instead, pour that energy back into yourself. Fill your days with people who reciprocate, with passions that light you up, with goals that remind you who you are outside of anyone else's validation. You'll find that when you stop pouring your time into what doesn't serve you, life starts giving you what truly does. And you can't control who stays or who goes, but you can control how you respond when people start. Pulling away, you can choose to panic and chase, or you can choose to breathe and let go. You can choose to keep explaining yourself, or you can choose to trust that the right people won't need explanations to treat you right. And when you start choosing peace over panic, self-worth over attention, silence over desperation, that's when everything begins to change. That's when you step into a version of yourself that doesn't beg to be loved, because you already know you are. And then once you've felt that peace, once you've tasted what it's like to stand firm in your own worth, you start to see everything differently. You begin to notice the subtle ways people reveal who they are. The late replies, the vague excuses, the moments where they test your patience, they no longer confuse you. You see them for what they are. Signs, indicators of energy that no longer aligns with yours. And instead of reacting with anxiety or self-doubt, you respond with calm detachment. You stop trying to control outcomes and start trusting patterns, because people's actions will always tell you the truth long before their words do. And you begin to realize that silence is not an enemy. It's information. When someone stops showing up, that's all the clarity you need. When communication fades, that's your closure. You don't need to chase answers when their behavior is already the answer. You don't need to beg someone to explain why they lost interest. You only need to acknowledge that they did. And that acknowledgement becomes freedom, because it shifts your focus from why did they stop caring to why am I still holding on? And that's the turning point. That's when you start to shift your energy inward. You begin to nurture yourself in the same way you used to nurture others. You start taking yourself out on walks, journaling your thoughts instead of texting them, finding peace in stillness rather than chaos. You learn that healing doesn't come from closure or apology. It comes from acceptance. It's in the moment you stop trying to rewrite the past and instead start writing your future. And when you stop texting someone who's no longer matching your effort, you stop negotiating your value. You stop auditioning for love. You stop bending yourself into smaller shapes to fit into spaces that were never meant to hold you. Because deep down, you know what it feels like when something's right. It feels mutual. It feels consistent. It feels peaceful. You don't have to decode every message or second guess every silence. You just know. And that kind of connection can only come when you're willing to walk away from the ones that don't give you that peace. And you might have moments where you question yourself. You'll wonder if maybe you overreacted. You'll think about all the good times and start missing the version of them who made you feel special. That nostalgia will whisper to you, maybe it could still work. But remember, missing someone doesn't mean they're meant for you. It just means you're human. It means you cared. But caring isn't enough when effort isn't mutual, because love without respect drains you, not fills you. And then when that loneliness creeps in, when you feel the pull to reach out just to feel something again, remind yourself of how much it cost you every time you did. Remember the sinking feeling in your stomach when they left you hanging. Remember how you started doubting your worth because of their silence. That pain wasn't love. It was the price of ignoring your boundaries. Every time you reached out to someone who wasn't reaching back, you traded your peace for hope. But now you're learning to protect your peace first. You're learning that no text is worth losing your self-respect. And what most people don't realize is that walking away doesn't mean you stopped caring. It means you started choosing clarity over confusion. It means you refuse to keep investing in uncertainty. And the beautiful thing about that decision is how it begins to transform you. Suddenly, your energy changes. You start glowing differently. People can sense the self-assurance in your tone, in your posture, in your presence. You're no longer waiting to be chosen. You're busy living. And that shift makes you magnetic. And it's not uncommon for the person who once took you for granted to notice this change. They might text again, casually testing the waters. A simple, "Hey, how have you been?" A late night, "I miss you." But by the time that message comes, you'll realize something. You no longer crave it the way you used to. You won't feel that rush of validation. You'll feel something steadier, clarity, because you'll see that their return isn't about love. It's about curiosity. They want to know if they still have access. But access to you is no longer free. It's earned through consistency, honesty, and effort, not nostalgia. And then when you don't reply, or when you reply with calm detachment, you'll feel a quiet pride inside you, not out of spite, but out of strength, because you'll remember how hard it was to break that pattern. You'll remember the nights you almost gave in, the times you almost texted, the moments you almost folded, but you didn't. You stayed strong long enough to remember your value. That's growth, that's transformation. And you'll start realizing that your attention is your most valuable currency. Whoever gets it earns it. Whoever wastes it loses it. You don't need to beg people to appreciate it. You just need to redirect it toward yourself and those who truly reciprocate. And suddenly the world opens up. You start meeting people who match your energy effortlessly. You find friends who check in without being asked. Opportunities that make you excited again. Hobbies that bring you joy. That's the reward of letting go. You make room for better. And what used to feel like rejection now feels like redirection. What used to feel like loss now feels like liberation. Because now you know that the people who drift away were never meant to stay forever. They were lessons, not lifelines. They came to show you the difference between attachment and connection, between effort and overextension, between love and dependency. You don't have to hate them or resent them. You just have to thank them silently for teaching you how to choose yourself. And then that's what this moment is really about, choosing yourself. Every time you resist texting someone who's not showing up, you're declaring to the universe, "I'm done settling for half effort." You're declaring, "I deserve reciprocity." You're telling life that you're ready for connections that make you feel calm, not anxious. And life responds to that energy. It begins to remove the people who drain you and replace them with those who see your worth without you having to prove it. And you'll notice the change in your own energy too. You'll stop overthinking messages. You'll stop waiting for replies that never come. You'll stop building stories in your head about what they might be thinking. Instead, you'll be present. You'll be grounded. You'll start to live again without the weight of uncertainty controlling your emotions. And that's the ultimate freedom, when your peace is no longer dependent on someone else's consistency. And it's not about playing hard to get. It's about being hard to forget. Because people remember those who respect themselves. They remember those who don't chase attention, but command it through their presence, their confidence, and their energy. When you stop texting someone who's lost interest, you're not being cold, you're being courageous. You're saying, "I refuse to water a plant that's already dead." And that kind of courage becomes contagious. It changes how you show up in every area of your life. And you'll start demanding more from yourself, not out of pressure, but out of purpose. You'll start setting boundaries, not to keep people out, but to protect your peace. You'll stop overgiving and start receiving. And slowly, you'll build a life that feels full, even without constant validation, because when your happiness no longer depends on someone else's attention, you become unstoppable. And then one day, when you meet someone new, someone who shows up with effort, consistency, and sincerity, you'll realize why it never worked with the ones before. You'll see that all the moments of silence, all the restraint, all the times you stopped yourself from texting back were leading you here to a place where you're finally loved the way you deserve. You'll see that the silence you once feared was the bridge that carried you from confusion to clarity, from anxiety to peace, from needing to be chosen to knowing you already are. And then when that realization finally sinks in, you start to understand the deeper meaning behind everything you went through. You see, it was never just about a person not texting you back. It was never just about being left on red or waiting for a response that never came. It was about learning what it means to truly honor yourself. It was about learning to stop giving so much power to someone else's inconsistency that you forget your own stability. Every unanswered message, every moment of silence, every time you felt invisible, it all pushed you closer to discovering what self-respect really looks like in action. And because self-respect isn't loud, it doesn't beg, it doesn't chase, it doesn't demand explanations. It simply decides that enough is enough. It recognizes when something no longer adds value and quietly walks away. And when you begin to live from that place, life feels different. You no longer see distance as rejection. You see it as direction. You no longer interpret silence as loss. You see it as space being cleared for something better to arrive. And you start realizing how much emotion, null energy you were spending trying to hold on to something that wasn't holding on to you. You remember how many nights you stared at your phone, rereading messages, replaying moments, trying to figure out what you did wrong. But now you see it wasn't about doing something wrong. It was about giving too much to someone who wasn't ready to receive it. And when that truth clicks, you stop internalizing other people's behavior as a reflection of your worth. You stop thinking, why didn't they want me? And start thinking, why did I keep trying to prove myself to someone who couldn't even see me? And that's where the real freedom begins. You stop needing closure because you become your own closure. You stop needing validation because you finally validate yourself. You stop waiting for their apology because you realize the peace you've created is the only apology you ever needed. And it's not that you become hard or bitter. It's that you become wise. You learn that people's inconsistency has nothing to do with your value and everything to do with their own emotional capacity. And when you start living from this place of strength, something beautiful happens. Your energy starts to attract differently. People begin to sense that you're not someone who can be strung along or manipulated with breadcrumbs. They notice that you don't overextend to prove your worth. You no longer confuse attention with affection or effort with interest. You can tell the difference between someone who's genuinely invested and someone who's just keeping you around for convenience. And that discernment becomes your greatest protection. And you'll find that your standards naturally rise, not because you're demanding more, but because you've finally learned what peace feels like. Once you've experienced peace, chaos becomes unattractive. Once you've known what it feels like to be valued, inconsistency becomes intolerable. And the things you used to accept, you simply outgrow. That's not arrogance, that's evolution. It's the quiet confidence that comes from knowing your heart deserves to be met with the same intention it gives. And then, as time goes on, you'll notice something even more powerful. You'll start feeling grateful for the people who pulled away because they taught you everything you needed to know about yourself. They showed you where your boundaries were weak, where your self-worth depended on outside validation, where your fear of being alone made you settle. Their distance became your mirror. And through that mirror, you saw the parts of you that needed healing, not from them, but from yourself. And you realized that every time you stayed when you should have walked away, every time you texted first when you knew you shouldn't, every time you accepted less because you hoped they'd give more, you weren't being foolish, you were being human. You were just trying to love. But now you love differently. You love without losing yourself. You give without overextending. You care, but you stay grounded. Because now you know that love that requires you to abandon your self-respect isn't love, it's dependency. And dependency feels like survival. It makes you believe that losing them means losing yourself. But independence, emotional independence, feels like freedom. It reminds you that you were whole long before they came along, and you'll still be whole long after they're gone. That's the kind of strength that can't be taken from you. It's the kind that grows quietly inside you each time you choose silence over chasing, self-worth over reaction, detachment over desperation. And one day someone will see you, and will really see you, and they'll understand your silence not as disinterest, but as depth. They'll see your restraint not as pride, but as peace. They'll feel the strength in your boundaries and realize that you're not difficult, you're discerning. You don't demand perfection, you just require reciprocity. You don't play games, you simply don't entertain confusion. And that kind of energy draws the right people in while naturally filtering out the wrong ones. And you'll start to notice how much calmer your life feels. No more waiting by your phone, no more wondering if you said something wrong, no more chasing clarity from someone who was never capable of giving it. Instead, you'll find yourself smiling at the peace that comes from not needing anyone to complete you. You'll start filling your time with things that make you feel alive again, hobbies, dreams, new experiences. You'll feel yourself growing, healing, and reconnecting to the version of you that existed before you ever gave your energy away to inconsistency. And the irony is, when you stop chasing, that's when people start chasing you, because confidence like that can't be faked. It radiates. It draws people in. But by then you'll be different. You won't be impressed by someone's sudden attention. You'll look for effort, for emotional intelligence, for alignment. You'll look for someone who shows up consistently, not just when it's convenient. You'll realize that chemistry is meaningless without consistency, and attraction means nothing without respect. And you'll stop letting people take temporary interest in you and treat it like permanent commitment. You'll start expecting more than potential. You'll want presence. You'll start measuring love not by how it feels in the moment, but by how it sustains over time. And that's when you truly reclaim your power. When you realize that the only validation you ever needed was your own. And you'll look back and remember the person you used to be, the one who checked their phone every 5 minutes, the one who overthought every silence, the one who tied their happiness to someone else's attention. And you'll feel compassion for them, because that version of you was learning. They were growing. They were discovering how to love without losing themselves.